you know, the and to that end of things, what we're aiming to today is really look at how AI is reshaping, faster than a lot of organizations can adapt. Every day there's a new headline, every day there's a new platform being launched. So what we're here to do is really look at how it's done, what it actually costs for an organization, what the opportunity cost of missing out, that FOMO side of things, and essentially what the law says about it. So the three lenses that we're going to be approaching this today on is really sort of the transformational aspect of things, the workplace law from a legislative perspective, and also, of course, workforce capability to essentially make sense of what's really changing for leaders and workers. So we have three fantastic panelists today. I'm going to hand over to each of them to introduce because they're certainly a lot more capable than I am. So I'll start with you, Linda. Would you like to introduce
Oh,
yourself quickly?
hello, everybody. I'm so glad to have you with us. So, I get to take the transformation lens. I've spent over 20 years of my life actually delivering transformations for customers, coming up with them, and then actually doing them. So, I get the lovely job of making this stuff real and having to keep the promises. But increasingly, I've been working with AI technologies and getting that into organizations. So, you'll get from me a lessons learned for what we've seen in the field.
Brilliant. Over to you, Ben.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ben Burke. I'm an employment lawyer and partner at Spark Hillmore Lawyers based here in Melbourne. And we are increasingly getting questions from clients about how AI impacts their business and the interrelationship with employment matters. And I've also done some work in the shareholder space. So I think it's an exciting industry sector at the moment.
Okay. Lady of the Moment, one of our partner organizations that APACAI represents, sort of around Europe, Asia, and here in Australia and New Zealand. But Helena, please introduce.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for coming. I'm one of the co-founders of a career tech platform called GoFigr. And one of the biggest problems and challenges that clients and people in our network are asking is what does AI do to the skills, shape of our workforce, the tasks that they perform? So most recently, we've been delving into task intelligence, job mapping, and looking at what skills, tasks, and jobs will be impacted as we deploy AI. So that's my area of focus.
Brilliant. We're going to be getting into a whole lot of that, as we move through the day. So let's start with the big picture today, and look at really what's actually changing for organisations on the ground. So, Linda, from a transformation perspective, and you are the person who's been responsible for so many organisations to actually implement and make this sort of happen. What's the biggest shift that you're currently, seeing in how organisations are basically thinking about working in the age of AI and that deployment side?
Yeah, so I think 2025 has been a really interesting year and there's been a lot of evolution. So I think I can answer that question in on two fronts. So the first is around just the progress that we've made and the mind shift that's happened as we've made more progress. And then the second one is, as you imagine, as we've made progress, we've also come up with some new problems that we're dealing with as well. So if I go to the progress front, we've actually just recently come back from the US because trade show season for all the major application vendors is literally just closed in the US with Thanksgiving coming around the corner. And what we've really seen there is a shift in the messaging around AI. So last year it was very much, it's new, please try it. But this year it's very much now, AI is just a part and parcel of the landscape that we're living in. It's a normal part of the world now. Let's just get on with it and put
Mm.
stuff in place. And
Yep.
so we're also seeing a lot of research come out, obviously from the major consultancies around the world, that actually provide some data to back up this position. So I read an article just the other day on there was a survey of 130 enterprises in the US. And from Q1 to Q3, 11% had AI deployments in production in Q1. By Q3, 39% of organizations had AI deployments in production. So that's a real shift from, the experimentation and the pilot programs that we were seeing more of last year to this year, people actually going, let's just get it into usage with organisations. And I think anecdotally, what's always been the case is Australia and this region has been about 6 to 12 months behind what we're seeing in the US. And so I'm definitely starting to see that shift in Australia, but it's definitely more prevalent in the United States at this point in time. So that's what's coming at us. Now, with all that progress, as you can imagine, we are getting to see a new set of challenges and new set of problems that we're having to deal with. And the big shift that I'm seeing there actually comes in two parts. So the first part is as we try and take this technology and put it into production, what we are exposing is all the deficits of our legacy environments.
Mhm.
And historically, there's been a lot of a conversation about data and the need to have more data that's still present. But what we're also coming across now, particularly as agents come into the AI program, is an increasing focus on the need for integration so that agents can actually do those bits of our jobs where we need to assemble
Mhm.
information from multiple systems, or we need to actually do work across multiple systems in order to get that job done. The second part, and I actually think this is the bigger part, is as we've been going from experimentation into production, we're actually seeing a real surge for productivity gains and ROI for all of these technology investments that we've made over the course of the last couple of years. And I think what that's causing is a shift in the way that we're thinking from foundational kind of capability or capacity building things like, rolling out prompt engineering training to our staff so that they know how to use these tools and have confidence in using these tools, to essentially a set of questions or problems that we're trying to answer in terms of what is the impact to process design or workflow? What is the impact to job design? What is the impact to operating models as we try and embed these tools more in the way that we actually carry out work on a day-to-day basis?
So do you think that so you just a really interesting point, from the US on some of the data coming out there from Q1 to Q3, you mentioned sort of from 11% to sort of 39%. Everyone's familiar with the term FOMO. There's a term that more recently coined, I think, just towards the end of 2023, so a very new one. But FOBO, sort of that essential fear of becoming obsolete, whether that's from a personal perspective or from an organizational perspective of becoming obsolete because you're not actually keeping up, with the current trends in the market. And do you think that's the primary driver at this stage on that transformation side?
Yeah, there is a lot of FOMO that's still in place, particularly in senior executive worlds. But I do think FOBO is becoming more prevalent, and that's just we are seeing people start to employ this tooling. And as they employ the tooling, they're starting to make strides. And I think people are starting to go, well, if I don't start to experiment with it, if I'm not keeping pace, then I risk becoming kind of falling behind in the pack and getting to the back of the
Mhm.
pack instead of being in front of the pack.
Yep. And I guess sort of the other one of the primary sort of talking points that's been coming out in some recent surveys and whatnot, whether it was from AWS with Amazon Web Services, whether it was from MIT was another one, and then a more recent one from McKinsey, that you know with the MIT and the Amazon Web Services, there was between 92 and 93% of projects. The McKinsey report was around 85%. Aren't
Mm,
getting out of that sandpit or that POC stage. So I guess
mm.
that sort of really sort of leads into my next primary question for you is what's really separating the companies that are navigating that AI change well from those that are actually struggling? And what are they actually doing to ensure that it is going to deliver on that expected ROI and follow its roadmap for success?
Yeah, I think of AI transformation a little bit differently
Hmm.
from what we've seen in the transformation space historically. And I think Gareth just put in a comment, you're right, it's not just a technology thing. I actually think of this as a system of two parts, technology and people. And I do think the line between those two parts is actually blurring the more we go forward. And there are certainly those who are actually putting out there the concept that the labour market and the software market are actually merging at this point in time, which blurs that line even further. But um, I do think as we look across the customers that we're certainly seeing adopt AI, the people that are separating themselves from the rest of the pack are actually investing more in the people and workforce elements, not just the tech components itself. So if I unpack that a little bit more, I've actually consistently been coming across 3 really good questions that people appear to be asking themselves to get more from their investments. The first one's really around, rather than just simply automating what we do today, they're asking questions like, what's the best place in our value chain where we should be applying human effort?
Mm-hmm.
And then using the answers to that to actually intentionally redesign workflows, processes, and things like that. So not just saying, well, I do this so a machine can do it faster, but where do humans actually make the most sense? Where can I get the most out of that human effort? And then automating the stuff that doesn't make as much sense for the human to be a part of. The second question that I found is, instead of just concentrating on adoption of this technology and saying, how do I equip you with skills so that you can use the tool, actually going the other way and asking, how do I increase the value of AI itself so our people reach for the tool
Mm-hmm.
rather than trying to push it onto them? And a really good example is when we did the technology implementation to ourselves, because who better to do this to than yourselves?
Absolutely.
We have this wonderful, you'll love it. It's a 996-page risk and compliance document that we have, that everybody in the organisation has read, as you can imagine, because it's so
Absolutely.
messy,
From end to end.
end to end. We originally trained essentially a model on the contents of that compliance document, and we rolled it out to everybody and then said, here's your prompt engineering course. Now that you're confident, go forth and conquer. You can use these resources now. And interestingly enough, we got a bit of uptake, but not really that much. But the moment we put an interface in front of it that felt more like asking questions of a friend,
Very good point.
we got adoption.
Yep. And I guess that sort of, comes to the core of one of the things we often discuss, with clients is that, it's very much, you can't look at it as just a machine that can, throw a magic wand around and sort of all will be fixed. I mean, as many CEOs would love that would be the case, but you've got to look at it as sort of really onboarding a digital worker and think of
Yeah.
them as an intern, as a new colleague, and ensure that sort of that, how that working model, sort of is going to be rolled out is defined the same way a job description is defined, for someone so they understand what their position is and how they're going to deliver. But and it's a really, great sort of foundation, but we see that sort of work is, changing sort of this fast sort of in the market. And to that end, it's almost a great sort of transition, because as those work rules and as those digital workers change in an organization, the rules and the risks have to evolve as well. So I mean, it's really,
100%.
I'll throw that one over to Ben, because typically we've seen in a lot of cases where the law, and let's look at social media, for example, but the law has, in a lot of cases, really been lagging behind on the rapid deployment of technology. So where are you seeing, Ben, the biggest, sort of grey zones, as AI is actually entering, the workforce and delivering these seismic shifts or these seismic tremors through organizations?
Well, Gordon, there's quite a lot of grey areas actually. So I'll just mention a few. Workplace surveillance and monitoring of employees by AI is a big one, and some key questions arise in that space. Is surveillance appropriate or excessive? What is the impact on employees? Does surveillance cause anxiety and psychosocial risks? There's a lot of focus on that at the moment. Does workplace surveillance legislation apply? And what might be the impact of new legislation on the techniques you're using? And then also equal opportunity and discrimination. Do your AI platforms directly or indirectly discriminate against employees or prospective employees on the basis of sex or gender, nationality or race, or other prohibited factors in breach of equal opportunity laws? Do you know how your AI platforms work and what assumptions they make? How do you ensure there's no inbuilt bias or discrimination in the way those platforms work? And some key risk areas in relation to equal opportunity and discrimination include recruitment, the assessment and selection of qualifying employees. How is that done? Is there inbuilt bias? And selection of employees for redundancy. And probably a third big area is data privacy and confidentiality.
Mm-hmm.
How are your employees using AI? Do you have control of that? Do you have visibility over it? Are they putting your confidential information into AI platforms? Are you putting their information, their personal and sensitive information, into AI systems? How do you safely collect and protect employee information? And decisions on termination of employment are also particularly relevant in this area. So just to give one example, if an adverse action claim is made under the Fair Work Act, the employer must prove the decision is not made for a prohibited reason. I think it can be very difficult to prove the basis of a decision which relies in whole or part on AI data. So there's some of the grey areas that have not yet been addressed by legislation or cases, but I expect we will see a focus on all of these topics.
Yeah, I think we touched on that yesterday when we were just having a quick catch up prior to this. You mentioned that New South Wales and Victoria are sort of proactively starting to sort of look to a legislative framework to start, bringing a bit of clarity on that side of things, to the marketplace, so that, sea levels can sort of make decisions and they know that they're going to be minimising their exposure. And we don't, none of us have got an absolute crystal ball at this particular stage, but, what are the murmurings that you've sort of heard from that legislative side of things?
Yeah, good question, Gordon. So there's not much legislation yet which directly regulates AI, but new legislation is clearly coming, and there are a few examples. I think in Australia, we're going to see a focus on some of the things I just mentioned:
Hmm.
excessive surveillance and monitoring of employees and psychosocial safety risks in particular. In terms of developments, there are some developments in some jurisdictions. So, for example, the European Union has a new Artificial Intelligence Act. It's not yet in operation. It's been delayed until 2027, but under it, providers of high-risk AI will be required to establish a risk management system and ensure human oversight of the system.
Hmm.
California also has, we talked about this yesterday a bit, new legislation which imposes obligations again on developers of AI to require an AI risk management framework that addresses catastrophic risks. And in Victoria, some of the audience may be aware that Victoria recently undertook an inquiry on workplace surveillance, and that inquiry, which was handed down in May this year, recommends new legislation which imposes a positive obligation on an employer to prove through a risk assessment that any workplace surveillance that's done is reasonable, necessary, and proportionate. So I think those are key words: reasonable, necessary, and proportionate. And New South Wales, you mentioned a moment ago, introduced a bill this week which proposes amendments to their Work Health and Safety Act, which will impose a duty on any business, a business conducting a business which uses a digital work system to consider and address risks arising from excessive workloads and excessive surveillance. So I think you can see quite a lot of development actually, and we might find that legislative development moves fairly quickly from this point.
Mm. I mean, I guess, when we're looking at, from a leadership perspective with inside an organization, what's some of the advice that, you're sort of delivering to, your clients sort of around how they think about accountability and decisions, which are made with or by AI at this particular stage?
Yeah, I think accountability is a key business issue in this space, as it is in all areas of governance. So a few points about accountability are sort of high-level points, but I think they're important. One is that you should not outsource business and employment decisions to AI platforms.
Hmm.
Use them, but don't allow them to make the final decisions. So AI platforms, in my view, shouldn't make final decisions, and that's because an employer or a business is always responsible for its own decisions. So a human should always make the final decision. I think Linda touched on that before. Also, I think, and others who've commented in this area think that the use of AI in employment matters and terminations is high risk. That doesn't mean it shouldn't
Yep.
be used, but you need to consider safeguards and protections for workers. And to do that, you need to do risk assessments. And risk assessments involve identifying, assessing, and minimising risks so far as is reasonably practicable, and including in that process addressing psychosocial risks. Now, you also need to consider officer due diligence. So, for example, in work health and safety legislation in most states and territories in Australia, officers have a positive obligation to understand the key risks associated with their business activities and ensure appropriate resources are available to manage risks. Now, resources means equipment, people, and money. So again, there's a focus on human people as well as AI tools. So just about striking the right balance there in your governance framework, really, but also exploiting the opportunities that AI systems provide.
Yeah, look, there's a good follow-on for a question I just saw that Gareth dropped into the chat side of things. Can you see that there? Otherwise, I'm happy to sort of just to bring
I
that up.
saw it momentarily, but it disappeared from my screen, so you might have to repeat it.
Well, just essentially, sort of Gareth was saying, sort of around existing legislation in relation to both people decisions cover both human and AI usage in things like recruitment. So you can't discriminate. You must have equal opportunities regardless of how the decision is made. And a side note, which I thought was really quite interesting, is why do we expect AI to be bias free whilst we don't seem too concerned about the overt and covert human bias to the same degree? I mean, you are still having a human-led decision, and that is, I think, as you just narrowed in, one of the sort of principal, safeguards, for organisations to make sure that humans are making the final decisions. But you still have overt and covert human bias. How have you sort of touched upon that in your experience?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, the question is absolutely right. Humans do have inbuilt biases and perceptions and make assumptions, and they need to comply with equal opportunity legislation. But I suppose the thing is with AI, tests can be run on AI, and there are some studies that show sometimes with some AI platforms, if tests are done, they show perhaps a predilection to select a certain category of employees over others, and that might be because of the way the machine has learned in the past. So, given those tests can be run, I guess that's kind of the validation that needs to be undertaken for AI platforms. But you're right. The same laws apply to humans as to systems. You need to ensure that you are treating people fairly and complying
Absolutely.
with the legislation.
Yeah, I mean, it is that sort of confirmation bias loop. The model is basically trained on the data that it has and the data sets that it has. So if it's looking at, say, a prevalence in a particular industry that 75% of the previous hirees within an organization were males within this particular age group from with these particular qualifications and background, it's developed a confirmation bias, sort of just naturally because it's a repetitiveness of the data that it's been receiving and confirming in the applicants that it's hiring. So I guess it's one of the it's not so much minefield, but certainly confirmation bias is one that we've been watching sort of very closely, especially in that talent acquisition recruitment space, to ensure that the compliance side of things is met.
Well, another point with this is that we know unions and applicant lawyers are going to be testing these things. I mean, they know that AI systems are being used widely, particularly among big employers. So they're going to be pushing the boundaries a bit, and there will be some test cases. So I think the message is employers just need to be alive to these issues and risks and make sure they understand how the platforms work as best they can.
Yeah.
Not
And the
suggesting
good
they shouldn't be used.
platforms. And the good platforms actually do log this stuff because we have actually heard of test cases in Europe in particular where people have claimed bias during the recruitment process. And we do know of people who have defended those positions based on essentially the logging that comes out of their systems because they've bothered to log this information as their systems have been processing those interactions. So, to Ben's point, we're
Yeah.
going to see more of it.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, the data and the models are basically trained on, sort of humans, and their data points that they're feeding it. So it's something that's going to certainly have to be navigated. Um, on that side, it's sort of, I think, a really good time to sort of, jump over to Helena, and you're essentially on the ground working with organizations on how that landscape is shifting, for the internal stakeholders, for employees, And essentially, the risks leaders need to keep in mind to ensure that they're doing it right and getting it right. So you're working currently with organisations on mapping sort of the impact on roles and skills. Where are you seeing sort of those biggest shifts at this stage, Helena?
Well, I think the first sort of big takeaway is that it's now become such an important topic to understand what work might look like and how that might impact. I guess in most cases is the thing that we all spend the most money on as companies, which is our human capital asset. It's now reaching the topic at boardroom. So it's reached a really senior level now. And as opposed to sort of, as Linda said, moving from pilots and experimentation, there's some recognition now that if successful, this stands to have quite a significant impact on how work is completed, who completes it, and the cost, I guess, of that workforce. So the very fact that this is that we've built a product to assess this, I guess, speaks to the level at which this topic has reached the boardroom agenda. And I guess what we're seeing now is AI doesn't really have a home. So AI responsibility, it's often deferred to as a sort of technology problem. So perhaps the CIO or CTO of the organization might be responsible for leading the charge. But these types of leaders aren't always aware of the downstream or trickle effects. And so we've seen some quite spicy headline cases in the newspapers recently where, large teams or contact centers or whole departments have been laid off thanks to AI, and the sort of trickle down effect on those that are left behind, or the lack of realization that the process doesn't neatly cover 50 humans, and we make those 50 humans redundant and then suddenly realize that their work spanned multiple other processes. So I think the very fact that this is now making the agenda at the executive level is a first. And so that's why we've been responding to it.
Brilliant. Do you think that sort of, at the moment, you're talking to a lot of C levels, do you think they're currently sort of underestimating, or overestimating sort of what the organizational impact is going to be and how quickly it's changing for them?
I think both.
Yeah.
I think both. And so much of the decisions that are made are kind of on vibes, right? So when we see AWS announcing 14,000 layoffs, or robots are going to take over the world, we've seen as many sort of, well, more failures probably than successes. I think that, I don't know, I sort of see two camps of thought. There's teams that think that they can, automate their entire contact center without having the underpinning data, or understanding the knock-on effect. And then there's those that are potentially being a bit too cautious. There was a really fun Pew study not that long ago, maybe only 18 months ago, where they asked Americans if they thought AI was going to impact their job. And I think 68% of Americans were like, yes, it's going to impact jobs, but only 28% of people said, and it's going to impact mine.
Like me.
And I can tell you now that the results of the model that we've created, that sort of dissects jobs into tasks, rolls it forward through the lens of AI, and predicts what might happen to that role, suggests that there is almost no job untouched.
Hmm.
It's quite scary, right? There's no one going to be untouched by it in some way, whether they're the one building the tools or using the tools, or not having to do something because the tools now do something that they were doing before. But what's been interesting is seeing like who that might impact. So some of the really interesting insights, aside from the fact that almost no job is untouched, were some of the other data. So we combined some labour market data with our analysis, and we can already see in Australian labour market data, this is definitely true for the US, that entry level jobs are being impacted. I wouldn't say decimated yet, but I would say the number of entry level roles being advertised in Australia, from my kind of cursory initial research, it's about 13% down, and that's not inconsequential, right? And then that has knock-on effects. So if we're not taking so many entry-level people, who are managers going to manage? So it sort of has seismic effects on the shape and size of your workforce. It impacts who you need to hire, what they will do, the skills those people need now, and the skills that perhaps might become, we're calling them sunset skills now. So the skills that become less critically important because a robot will do that task or an AI will do that task instead of a human, and other skills that become more important, and not just directly because of a result of technology. Some other interesting things that we've talked about earlier on in the session were this sort of emerging trend to just allow people to do the human only work. So look, like Linda said, so looking at the work that's performed, how it's performed and who's performing it. So emphasis being played on taking the robot out of the human and then emphasizing our, human only skills. But I think the reality is that there's going to be sort of short to medium term destruction of jobs before we see what we hope will be the creation of jobs that we can't even imagine now.
Mm.
Yeah, look, I mean, I guess that sort of really does sort of give quite sort of the opportunity from an internal mobility and a training perspective for a lot of organisations, and it almost leads sort of straight into the next question, which is how do companies essentially that everybody knows that sort of AI, if it's done right, is going to increase productivity, increase the bottom line, and this also leads into a question that. And I'll tie it in with Trevor's question just around the thoughtfulness, for who are going to be the most successful sort of organizations are those that sort of, do we, call it in an ethical AI sense, those who, treat their staff and their employees as primary stakeholders. And they look at implementing, an AI deployment, with a human-led, perspective to gain basically the greatest sort of ROI, because you touched on that with entry level positions, and they are certainly some of the ones that are most under threat at the moment, and that is certainly all of the data and the articles and whatnot that we're seeing. But how do you sort of talk to sort of organizations as to how they do this really effectively for retraining and upskilling their current workforce?
I think the key is to get prepared. We
Hmm.
know that this is happening, right? We're not, everyone on this call will know that to some degree this is going to touch their job, their life, or certainly someone in their network, right? I think it's unreasonable now to sit there and be surprised in a couple of years that this thing's coming for your lunch, and that there's no, that we get surprised in a couple of years. And I think success is taking action now. There is definitely no roadmap for this. I think that was the headline of the webinar, even, is that
Yeah.
none of us has done this successfully. Everyone's in the same boat, but there are some compasses available. So I think it's sort of incumbent on us now in the roles that we're in to get prepared. And not everyone's going to need to be an AI prompter or an AI or an AI specialist. I think that's crazy. But it is possible to do some assessment now of what might change in the way of work. It is possible to map people's skills. People have got unbelievable skills that, likely if you're in a company of more than 50 people, you're probably sat next to someone who you had no idea had a past life in something really interesting, and working out how the roles that we do think will be critical and upskilling towards those critical roles. So I think it's a case now of preparedness and getting, what bets are we willing to take, and how do we get ourselves prepared so we're not on the front page of the newspapers in a year or two making sways of redundancies. But I think we have a choice. I think it's up to us how we employ it. And there definitely will be companies who follow the do more with less pressure. And I
Hmm.
understand that we're all under enormous pressure to do more with less. Or there's going to be the sort of, what new value can we create? So what new business lines, what new opportunities, what new work might we be doing, or more new products or services might we be offering in the future that let our grow our business in a direction that we never imagined it taking. So yeah, time to get prepared.
Absolutely. And as we can say, going running off for a shovel and a pile of sand ain't going to help you, or a beach is not really going to help you right now. You need to go into it eyes wide open.
For your own job, right? For your own
Well,
future
exactly.
ability, if nothing else, just be selfish. If you want to have a job in a couple of
Yeah.
years, get yourself ready, eh?
Yeah, so look, great sort of Chinese sort of character for is the same for risk and the same for opportunity. So if I'm going to sort of put this around the panel, but sort of from each of your perspectives, if you're talking to a CEO today, what's the one thing crystal ball moment here, guys? But what's one thing that you would say you need to do right now to be thinking about how to get ahead of this I'll use that word again, seismic shift that's rolling through.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, go on. What
All right.
you spoke up, Linda. Away you go.
Um, okay, I'm starting to hear this as a whisper.
Hmm.
Um, but what I'm finding is that people are starting to turn to culture to create organizational resilience to tackle the uncertainty that something like this is creating. And it's
Hmm.
not that we've never seen this sort of structural uncertainty before. I mean, certain industries have certainly seen it before. So things like, the music industry had to face it when digital music came out. Like there are existentialist threats that people have dealt with before.
Hmm.
And I I find it really interesting that people are starting to talk about how do we create these cultures of resilience so that as a group we know how to navigate this uncertainty together and work through it rather than sit back and try and avoid it.
Absolutely. Do you want to jump in there, Helena? Because I've got another pointed sort of question for Ben in a sec that actually just popped up in the chat. From a legal perspective, but I thought it was a very good one as well.
Well, I've already said get prepared, right? I think I've made that
Yep.
point there. This is coming. Toothpaste isn't going back in the tube on this one. My second would be around like transparency. Um,
Hmm.
and I know that this is really hard, and I know I sit in a different position than perhaps many people who are sitting in a organization of a few thousand people. But I do a weekly future of work jobs post. I know lots of people in this call have commented on that. And the reason
Hmm.
I do that is to look in the tea leaves of what's happening. So if I see a role, for example, with a company hiring a conversational design specialist, my brain goes to the fact, well, that means they're looking to automate their contact center.
Hmm.
And people in that company will be making the same assumptions. If they see these AI hires popping up here, there, and everywhere, or experiments, and the intention or strategy for AI deployment in the company is a bit secret and murky, that's the thing that's going to create fear, create resistance, stop your people adopting the technology at all because you've given them such uncertainty. They're going to resist those efforts. So I guess it's have a position on it and don't do it in the dark because your people aren't stupid. They're probably worried already. And you'll likely have more success if you involve them in the process than do it behind their back. But that's just my personal view.
Look, there was a question that just popped up from Ian Wood, who actually happens to be my co-founder with APACAI, but it was specifically to Ben, and it was sort of there've been quite a lot of older workers who've basically with serious levels of concern, and we've seen sort of the headlines sort of with certain large organizations, consultancies, whether finance, pure consulting, who've been sort of freeing a great deal of large numbers of employees because they don't think they can actually get up to speed. And do you think that moving forward that employers could be at risk in a legal perspective from this particular approach, assuming that certain demographics, that those who are older don't have the capability to adapt to this new world?
Ben just dropped off and rejoined, so you
Oh
might
no, he's
Oh,
yeah,
he,
it's just back.
yeah, he might not have heard that question, Gordon. You might need to
oh, rats! I've got to run that
yeah.
one.
Sorry.
So Ben, you're back now. So
Yeah, sorry, there seems to have been a power failure with my computer, but I'm back on. Can you hear me now?
yeah, we've
Yes.
got you, mate. We've got you.
Okay.
But look, I mean, when we were just, it was a good question for how you would advise, I think, specific to a CEO with a larger or older, sort of workforce, where we've seen a lot of large redundancies, in specific spaces, where employees have been deemed sort of that they won't be able to get up to speed, with this rapidly emerging technology. Do you think that that with how fast this is moving forward, that employers are really going to be at risk, sort of in a legal perspective? From basically, sweeping sort of redundancies, assuming, the older demographics can't get up to speed.
Yeah, look, I think that is a real risk. As I said before, I think it's clear that applicant law firms and unions and other groups will be testing in this space. We'll be bringing test cases and they'll be challenging redundancies and I think one of the issues employers need to grapple with is mapping out opportunities for redeployment of impacted workers and being more creative than they have been up till now. And in fact, there's a recent case, Helensburgh Coal. It's not it doesn't deal with AI, but it actually imposes a broader obligation on employers to search for redeployment opportunities. And I think that's going to be an area we're going to see more development. So I think employers need to really look creatively at how they can redeploy all categories of workers, but particularly older workers, and also think about actually paying for retraining and reskilling. I think that we're going to see obligations being imposed in the future on employers in Australia to be more creative in how they redeploy their workforce.
Look, there was a great question that just popped in there from Fran, and it actually sort of dovetails really nicely with one of the ones that I've got sort of sitting here from our our registrations. But as sort of AI really is becoming sort of a primary interpreter of information, how do we find truth um, and maintain trust when we're having to move from a need to know basis to an open and transparent conversation because people aren't stupid, but sort of when models generate coherent outputs, how do we make sure that they're grounded in that metaphorical truth? Does
Ben, can I ask you a specific one on that?
Yeah.
Like if an AI agent gave false, I don't know, financial advice or something like that. I mean, maybe that's a bad
Who's
example. That's a
responsible?
bit better regulated for. But let's just say a customer gets incorrect advice off the back of an AI. Who's liable there?
Well, that's a big question because it depends on who's actually responsible for the AI machine. And an AI agent is not a person, not a legal person. So legal persons are companies, corporate entities, or human beings. So I think that can be quite a messy question to answer. How do you work out who's liable for false information or misrepresentation? I mean, this issue could arise in the context of consultation with employees in a major redundancy process. We know that AI agents are capable of doing consultations on a very large scale, but what if there's a mistake or some problem in the way the messages are delivered and there's false or inaccurate information? Who is liable for that? I mean, I think ultimately the employer that's relying on the information and the process would primarily be liable, but it's a vexed question. And I think at some stage we're going to have to confront the issue of how do you deal with agent to agent communications, because we already have, and Linda can comment on this, communications between AI agents in one business with an AI agent in another business. Well, what's the status of those communications? Because the AI agents are not persons, they're not legal persons at this point.
It's rapidly evolving, and there's a lot of theoretical questions on that side of things. I know I read a report where sort of two AIs started talking to one another, through a chat conversation, and literally in the space of about a minute, they actually worked out they were talking to another AI, and they switched to binary, and the progression of the conversation moved, quite devastatingly quickly. But outside of AIs talking to AIs, I think that within sort of the hiring process and within people and performance, when you're looking at a company's sort of EVP, and their brand and their culture and what it means to be that company, how do we sort of see that process of more automation and less connection? What major impacts do you think we're going to have in the hiring process there? Do you want to jump on that one, Linda?
I think Helena wanted to say something.
Oh,
I will let Helena go.
All I can say is I've seen examples of it going wrong. So
Yeah.
I'll start with an example of it going wrong. One of the really clever people in my network did a consulting project with a recruitment team who automated their entire end-to-end recruitment process. Not all AI, because if you think about it, you could stitch together a series of vendors and processes now. You don't need to wait for AI to do that. But they found that their candidate renege rate, so the amount of declines they were having from people who'd accepted a job, went rapidly up. And that's because there had been no human connection or relationship. There's no sunk cost in this process. And at the end of the process, when you're given a button to say, accept, fine, you've made it easy for people to say no. So stripping out all of what's special and important as it relates to human connection and relationship, I think I think don't underestimate how weird we are as people. We can does not mean that we should. So all I can speak to is an example of it going wrong. And this is anecdotal, right? This is not necessarily fact, and don't treat it as so. But I am now starting to hear cases of people actually quitting their jobs because there isn't an opportunity to work on anything AI related, a bit more in the tech sector than anything, because these sort of people know that their kind of career currency and relevance is going to be driven by their skills and exposure to AI related work. And so if you are now not offering any opportunity as an employer to sort of dabble in these types of projects and interesting work, I do wonder if that's going to become more prevalent. And then the third thing is it's going to have to be part of your employee value proposition, to be able to offer sort of interesting and meaningful and relevant and future-proof work, I think, to companies, because everyone's going to be at AI. And there are, I suppose, more boring companies out there who maybe don't have the enormous budgets to sort of just chuck money at the problem. And so if we aren't thinking about our value proposition, thinking about growing our own talent and so on, I think that's a mistake, that we might be waiting to happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I mean, I've certainly seen a lot of anecdotal evidence that goes both ways as well. So, for example, I have seen situations where people felt really good about talking to the AI during the recruitment process because the AI had time on their hands and actually asked them how their day went
Yeah.
and listened.
The natural empathy there, because it's not on the clock, when it's actually having to go through a set of questions, if that empathy in the conversational design has been done correctly, then yeah, people are going to feel comfortable. We've seen that with one of our other partners, sort of on the actual satisfaction for prospective, hires, that they had a sort of 57% 5-star, interaction satisfaction, 37% were 4-star. There are only a few who just go, I want to talk to a human. Great, we can
Yeah.
actually do that. We can move that forward. But you're right, absolutely. The empathy side of things, and not being sort of having to get through 30 calls that day.
Yeah, and so I think this is the opportunity for us all is to actually rethink how we use this technology to best effect and how we leave the things that are good about us as human beings and the connections that we have with people because we are social creatures. It actually has the opportunity to enhance what we're good at and remove the stuff that really is not us. So, because of all the people in this room, how many of you have a part of your job where you are doing something along the lines of I'm copying something from here and I need to copy it perfectly into something here? Everybody has that as part of element of their job, right? Why don't we get the tools that are good at that to do that so that as a human being you can do the stuff that you're good at?
Yep.
One other
That's
point I would raise, Gordon, is that I talked before about the potential for inbuilt or inherent bias and assumptions in AI platforms, but the opposite may also be true. That with recruitment and other processes where AI agents are dealing with people, they actually might provide more accurate information more consistently, and they might not have any hidden agendas. They wouldn't, you wouldn't expect them to have any hidden agendas. So they might actually provide, more accurate communication with people. So we need to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, it doesn't have that sort of inherent deceptiveness, sort of that need to know. It should be open, and honest, and that certainly is very much defined by the guardrails, which are, basically people led on the instructional side of things for knowledge bases, for AIs. Before we wrap it up, would you like to sort of throw in there a parting sort of wrap up thought, Helena, before I sort of let everyone know sort of what the follow up from this is going to look like?
Well, first of all, thank you for coming. Thanks for the lovely, engaging chat and the interesting questions. This has been amazing. We will issue a recording, so we'll email everyone a recording of this webinar. So do feel free to share this with your colleagues if you want to, and we'll make sure everyone gets a nice follow up asking if they have any questions that they didn't have the opportunity to ask. So just a huge thanks to all of the speakers and for Gordon for hosting us today.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, and it's not just a tech story. It's literally a life changing, world changing, story at the moment that as I said, that you can either put your head in the sand, but that there's no one who this is not going to actually be touching, and certainly not, from a corporate or a organizational or even a government perspective. There are some jobs out there that it's going to take a whole lot longer. I think Naomi jumped in and said maybe I should retrain as a masseuse.
Oh yeah, that one's safe.
Yeah, that was,
I reckon
and
a masseuse.
plumbers and electricians.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
electricians.
model
Yeah.
says that's a good one. Okay, that's a good career choice.
Absolutely. So look, we are going to sort of follow this up with, and I will go through this chat and see sort of whether I can get a couple of additional sort of points that that some of you have raised in there, and see if we can just put a couple of bullet points under those. I think it's always a great follow up because we never get a chance to actually get through all of the questions that everyone raises. So look, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today. As I acknowledged before, I don't think there's too many people on this call who are literally sitting around twiddling their thumbs, just going, "Geez, I've got a spare hour or two today." So it's very, very much appreciated, especially at this time of year. Um, Based on that note, we'll be in touch with some further communications, as Helena said, a recording from today. Hopefully answer a couple of additional questions. But thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you all. And we shall see you again. There'll be a whole series of these coming through from early 2025 with Go Figure and also with APACAI. And we hope to see you there. We'll be covering a lot of very broad topics and hopefully a lot of hopefully a lot of positive changes that are coming for the market.
Thanks, guys.
Excellent talk. Thank you, guys.
Really appreciated.